Welcome back. And let's start with that breaking news now that the Coast Guard is responding to reports of a collision between a tanker and a cargo vessel off England's northeastern coast. Let's get the latest with our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Mark.
Well, the latest that we're hearing is that some 30 casualties, they're being termed, have been brought ashore to Grimsby by a number of different vessels. We can show you the latest images, latest video from the scene where you can see the vessels on fire out there in the Humber estuary. Two vessels, an oil tanker, the MV Immaculate, and a cargo vessel, the MV Ceylon. Both vessels on fire and extremely badly damaged. This statement comes from Martin Boyers, Chief Executive of the Port of Grimsby East. He said initially 13 casualties were brought in on a Windcat 33 vessel, followed by another 10 on a harbour pilot boat. Now, he's also just said that a further 9 casualties, he's described them as, have been brought to Grimsby as well. But there are, he said, still people that are unaccounted for. He said that there was a massive fireball that resulted from this collision, which is clearly very ominous and worrying news indeed, because there would have been dozens of crew members on both vessels, at least 40 odd, the combined crew of both of these vessels. So we are hearing now 32 people, casualties have been described as that have been brought ashore, but their conditions are not yet known. But clearly that is of concern to hear them described as casualties and not survivors at this stage. They will, of course, be triaged, assessed by medics in Grimsby before then being transferred, if required, onwards to hospital. But a very serious situation that unfolded a couple of hours. It's still ongoing with both these vessels ablaze, and indeed the sea around these vessels full of burning aviation fuel, we're told. Ships in the area being told to keep a safe distance away from these two vessels as the search and rescue, of course, continues, looking for any other crew members, any survivors that might at this stage still be unaccounted for.
It's the most horrific story, and the reason it's such a horrific story is it's so unusual. This happened in very good conditions at sea. One of the boats, we understand, was moored there. It is incredibly unusual, isn't it? Are we getting any more information from the Coast Guard about potentially what went wrong? Was there a catastrophic incident in the bridge of the ship that hit the other one?
Well, with modern technology, there are all these amazing sort of apps that you can download, and marine traffic, which we were just catching a glimpse of there, has been very useful for us because we were able to see on that marine traffic app that this oil tanker, the MV Immaculate, was at anchor in the outer anchorage of the Humber estuary, but the other motor vessel, the cargo ship MV Ceylon, was heading straight towards this oil tanker side on at 60 knots, which is close to 20 miles an hour. For a merchant vessel, it's doing a significant speed there, and there's no indication, according to the marine trafficker app, that the vessel either slowed down or took any kind of made any effort to sort of maneuver away. Perhaps it wasn't able to because of some kind of hydraulic issue. We don't know at this stage, but hitting that vessel as it did at such a high rate of knots, that is probably why we're getting these reports now from officials in that area of a massive fireball at the time of the collision between the two vessels. And clearly, if there were any crew in the immediate areas affected by that explosion, then that is very worrying indeed.
Mark, I understand that ships have autopilot controls in the same way that planes do, but clearly you would expect there to be somebody manually paying watch, if you see what I mean, and especially as it's broad daylight. Are there any indications that there were any calls for help, or that anybody tried to warn the ship, the Coast Guard tried to warn the ship, or did this happen just completely out of the blue and nobody was aware of it until it happened?
Well, in terms of a big ship, like a cargo ship, like the MV Ceylon, it obviously has a big bridge which would have been manned. It's manned 24 hours a day with a bridge watch officer and other crew potentially, depending on what they might have been doing at that time on the bridge as well. So they would, especially in busy shipping lanes, in areas around a coastline when there is anchorage around that coastline, when there are other vessels in what can often be very busy shipping lanes, you would never have a bridge that is abandoned and not, that didn't have someone in charge monitoring the onward passage of that vessel. That makes what has happened all the more puzzling, and it might point to some kind of catastrophic mechanical failure on board the MV Ceylon that prevented the officers on the bridge from steering the vessel away from that tanker. But very, very worrying indeed, the fact that it was travelling still at such a high speed, didn't appear to manoeuvre away from the tanker as it collided with its side on.
Obviously, the two ships involved, the tanker is a US-registered boat and the Portuguese-flagged container ship. Do we know the nationalities of any of the casualties yet?
There will be a multitude of nationalities. They always are on these ships. You get many people, for instance, from the Philippines that will work on these ships, but it may be that some of the senior officers are from Western nations. We don't know at this stage the makeup of the crew in this individual case. We can bring you a bit of audio now, actually, that we got shortly after this collision. This was the dramatic moments afterwards, where the Coast Guard was putting out a general mayday to all vessels in the area to come in to assist, to try to be careful themselves, anyone that could offer assistance. This is what that Coast Guard audio radio message said.
Ceylon has collided with tanker Stena Immaculate in the outer anchorage. Both vessels are abandoning. Vessels who have firefighting equipment or who can assist with search and rescue, contact Humber Coast Guard on channel 16. Vessel Stena Immaculate is carrying Jet A1 fuel, which is on fire.
Well, you heard there that the oil tanker, the MV Immaculate, was carrying that aviation fuel, which is on fire, not just damaging very badly both of those vessels, but also on fire in the water, making that environment round the two vessels extremely difficult for those vessels, any rescue vessels, which is why all shipping's being told to keep a safe distance. But what we don't know at this stage is what the MV Ceylon, the cargo vessel, was carrying. We know that had come from Grangemouth, the oil refinery, petrochemical plant up in Scotland, and was heading south from Grangemouth. So it's possible that it was also carrying flammable and potentially hazardous cargo as well. But the still images that we've seen from the close-up of that cargo vessel show very, very severe damage to that vessel, with many burnt out containers on the upper decks.
Reading here, if the Stena Immaculate was completely full of that Jet A1 aviation kerosene, she may have been carrying more than 58 million litres of fuel. Obviously, as well as the horror of the accident that we've seen, there's obviously a huge pollution issue here as well.
I'm struggling to hear you. If I could just ask the director to take his finger off the talkback button, please, so I could just hear you a bit better there, Don. Could you just repeat that, please?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mark, if the Stena Immaculate was completely full of A1 jet aviation kerosene, which we think she was, she may have been carrying more than 58 million litres of fuel. So obviously, as well as the horrors of what has happened, there's also a huge pollution issue here.
There's absolutely potential for a pollution disaster to unfold from this as well. The fact that fuel that's spilled into the sea is on fire, perhaps counterintuitively might be a good thing, because we know that in past oil tanker disasters, what sometimes they do when they have a very significant oil spill is to do a controlled burn on that oil to try and burn off as much of the oil as possible before it washes ashore. Now, this is not a controlled burn by any means, but some of that fuel, if it's on fire, that will certainly help burn off. But of course, it's carrying very, very significant quantities of oil, and if that vessel sinks, as it may well do, having been hit side on at a high rate of knots by another very big vessel, it could be crippled to the point where it sinks. Then you've got a completely different challenge for the maritime rescue authorities to deal with as well, because you'll have an oil tanker at the bottom of the Humber estuary with still many thousands of gallons of fuel on board and liable to leak at some point out into the Humber estuary.
Absolutely horrific. Mark White, thank you very much. Mark will be bringing us up to date with that breaking story throughout the rest of the show.